Rick Scott appeared on Face the Nation and was asked, Rick Scott, you previously said that we should elect officials that we would hire. We would hire to work for us. That's the type of people that we should be electing to these positions of power, who have the character and the skills and the qualifications that we would want to hire them to work for us. And so then the host asks, all right, Rick Scott, here's an example or two examples of Republicans who have been nominated to run for Senate. Would you hire them? Do you think that they're qualified to be someone that you would hire? And his answer is very slippery. He doesn't really want to get to the root of that question because he probably would admit in the privacy of his own home that he would never hire the two individuals that this host highlights. I will say before we jump in, our podcast listeners won't experience this, but for our viewers on YouTube and otherwise, I have a policy on the Luke Beasley Show where I don't make fun of people's appearances. So I'm not going to start violating that policy today. But without saying anything, Rick Scott gives me the heebie-jeebies. The literal, is there such thing as literal heebie-jeebies? I don't know. The deep and profound heebie-jeebies. That is what Rick Scott gives me. Stop looking at me, Rick. Okay, continue.
In a local radio interview in July, you talked a lot about your business as an executive, and you said we should start electing people that we would hire. In Georgia, Herschel Walker, Republican Senate candidate, has lied about the number of children he has, about his business dealings. His ex-wife said he held a gun to her head and said, "I'm going to blow your effing brains out." In Arizona, the candidate Blake Masters called the Unabomber an underrated thinker. He said that al-Qaeda doesn't actually pose substantial threat to Americans. I mean, I've got a list of candidates here who've had some and said some pretty troubling things. Would you hire these people to work for you?
Well, you'd go through each person, but I'm not the one doing it. It's the voters of those states are doing it. The voters.
So this answer struck me as very similar to Joe Manchin's answer when he was asked, would you support the or do you want the Democrats to win in the midterms? And Joe Manchin went, oh, well, I can't make that decision for the Democratic voters. They can choose who they will, or sorry, I can't make that decision for the voters. They'll have to make that decision themselves. And it's like, yeah, that, sure, that wasn't the question. Do you want the Democrats to win in the midterms? Well, who beats me? I mean, and it's very similar here with Rick Scott. He's asked, would you hire, I'm asking about you, Rick, would you hire these people to work for you based on their kind of Looney Tune ideas? And Rick Scott's answer is, well, I can't make that decision for the voters. They can make up their minds on their own. Okay, great. I agree with you. We're not saying, are you going to make the decision of who wins these races? We're saying we want to know if you will stand by your statement and say, yeah, I would hire Herschel Walker, even with all the things he's done and said. But he avoids it completely, which I don't really know why. Maybe he doesn't want to be associated with them. Probably that's it. If I were a Republican, I guess you just kind of have to suck it up unless you want to speak out against them and just go, sure, yep, I would hire them. It's hilarious how he does everything to try to slip out of this.
So states are going to make a choice.
You're trying to help Senate Republicans and lead them to victory. These are your candidates.
So, you know, Margaret, as you remember, the voters in Arizona choose who they're going to vote, and what they're going to choose is they're going to choose between Blake Master and Mark Kelly.
Yeah, Rick, we know how voting works. We're asking your opinion, and you're not giving it to us.
Mark Kelly has voted to keep the border open. He has never voted for border security. He's voted for the tax increases. He's voted for cutting Medicare. You know, he's voted. Did
you hear how his Medicare kind of trailed off? I think it's because he's the one, Rick Scott, who's pushed to cut Medicare, Medicaid. Rick Scott was the one who proposed that every single major government program sunsets after 5 years, I think it was. So that means they would have to reauthorize through voting for another like Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid, whatever bill every 5 years, which, you know, with the current state of the Republican Party would put it in jeopardy each 5 years. There's a good amount of Republicans who I think would probably, in the name of cutting down the size of the government, not support continuing Medicare or Social Security. Maybe not because it's political suicide, and obviously people very much like their Medicare and Social Security, but in sneaky ways for years and years and years, they've tried to cut those programs. And so he came out and was, even Mitch McConnell had to say publicly, no, I don't agree with Rick Scott on this, because Rick Scott was saying even Social Security and Medicare should sunset every 5 years, which obviously would not be a good thing for the country. So it's funny how he tried to put that on Mark Kelly, who's obviously a Democrat running for Senate, the incumbent right now. Mark Kelly wants to cut Medicare. Really, Rick?
With Chuck Schumer and with Joe Biden basically 100% of the time. Warnock's got the same problem. This election is going to be about Joe Biden. And so this election is going to be about all the bad things that have happened. The fact that we're going into recession, the fact that, inflation's at 9%, the fact that gas prices are up $2, all these things, that's what people are looking at.
But these are your Senate Republican candidates. These are your candidates.
And the voters of each of these states, the voters of these states are going to decide if they're going to hire. Now, I get to vote in Florida, and that's how I think about it. But the voters in those states will choose in those states who they want. And it's a choice between two people. But look, all the Democrat nominees are basically Biden clones.
Yeah.
By the way, they won't campaign with Biden.
But if you are, you would acknowledge that if somebody went in for an interview for a private corporation, these things would come up as red flags to HR. So
Margaret,
it's just
Biden is not campaigning with anybody because he's toxic. That's how the voters think. That's why they say 72% of.
Again, if you're a Republican, this is a good talking point, but completely avoiding the question. It's just so fascinating. I feel like politicians should find new ways to avoid questions, because the way that he just did there was so stereotypical, was straight out of a movie of a politician trying not to answer something, that I feel like it comes off as so dishonest, even though obviously if you're a Republican, you're going to want to, bring the narrative each time over to criticizing Biden, which is, I'm not even, that's not even bad, really. If you're in the opposite party, of course, you're going to want to criticize the president in power who's of the opposite party. And that's your right. And that's why we have the system that we do. But try to do it in a way that doesn't come off as so obviously slimy. But I do want to make a point, because as we see in so many of these clips, and again, I understand why the it's Biden's fault that inflation's happening talking point keeps getting brought up. And I just want to say, I'm not avoiding that. Someone said recently, you only do stories about something. I really don't. First of all, if you notice that all my stories are centered around a clip of some individual that's prominent, that's because that's all people will click on. That's all people will be interested in. But then I make points about all the important issues around it. So right now we're talking about Rick Scott. So his little face is going to be in the thumbnail. But then around it, we're going to talk about inflation. We're going to talk about gas prices. We're going to talk about Medicare, Medicaid fraud that he did. We're going to talk about the scary and bad candidates that are running these races. So even liberals have said before, oh, so many of your videos are about something. I forget the specific critique that happened recently. And it's listen, if I just do a story about one particular issue that has nothing to do with any of the kind of viral videos that are going on or whatever, no, there's going to be zero interest in it. But I can make very nuanced and interesting and important points around a video that's gone viral. So that video has gone, semi-viral, not really, just got some attention over the weekend. And so then I can show you that and make important points around it. So that's kind of just so you know, if you're someone who is very critical of my format, that's why. I want to do something that'll catch people's eye by covering someone else. So Rick Scott said this, and then within it, I can make my own points that I want to make. So I was going to say that inflation, guys, you have to understand, under even Trump, which I'm not blaming him for this, but when the economy crashed because of COVID, they pumped trillions into the economy, trillions of dollars while Trump was president, okay? Trillion. And so after that, it takes a while. Economic factors aren't instant. You're going to see the effect of that. You add on top, because it became a talking point that inflation was going to happen, we've seen very, very documented and historic price gouging. And so you add those two factors together. And then on top of that, because COVID threw off our supply chains completely, and getting back sorted out all of these complex supply chains that we have, it just takes a while, and it really did get really messed up. You add all those three factors together, yes, you're going to have inflation, and yes, it hurts. But you have to understand, when is it something I can blame the person in power for, and when is it not? Now, I think you can blame Biden for not responding as perfectly as possible. I bet there's something, I'm not super aware of it, but I bet there's something he could have done above and beyond that would have helped to ameliorate inflation earlier. I'm sure. There's a lot the government can do. That would have taken the support of people in the House and the Senate, and it would have been very, very kind of, difficult based on our current political landscape. But I think you could say Biden should have done more. I don't think you can say Biden is to blame for inflation. We're seeing it worldwide. You have to logically think about the fact and look at all of the economists' analysis of this, that yes, whenever you're trying to get out of a economic crash, which much of this happened under Trump, and you're investing all this money into the economy, dumping monies in the stock market, all of these things, and then you come out of it, our supply chains are whacked out, so having a hard time getting the proper supply out into the economy, and then companies are price gouging at record levels, and then with oil and gas specifically because of the Russia-Ukraine war, even more increase on those prices. Yes, we're going to have inflation. Yes, gas prices are going to be high, and it's so painful, and we have to address it. And I understand why it's an issue, and I totally get the inclination. You look at the person in power and you blame them for what's going on, and I think that's totally fair. I just want people to understand why I take a pretty clear stance against saying this is all the Democrats' fault. And that's why I really think we should reelect them in the midterms, and I think in 2024 as well, because good policies that they're pushing for, some of them, like we saw the Inflation Reduction Act, is going to make the lives of Americans better. And that's what we want to see. And because these bad economic factors are happening, we can't give up all of that, because the economic factors are not caused by the Democrats being in power. And sometimes it is blaming the person who's in power, sometimes not. You just got to look at the specifics of the situation. And so again, I don't blame people. I'm not saying anyone's dumb for thinking it's Biden's fault. You're going to look at the president and think, I'm going to blame him because right now my gas pump is saying crazy stuff. Or I'm going to blame him because I can't purchase groceries. And I totally get that inclination. But you do have to understand the bulk of the money was spent while we were in the heat of the pandemic, which you know when that was. And tons of money was dumped into the economy. And the Fed was pumping trillions into the economy. That was under Trump, again, I'm saying. And then also Biden passed the American Rescue Plan. But you do have to be honest with the facts of the situation. So if you're left, right, or center, I think you should do a good job of doing that so that we can understand who would be better to keep in power or put in power. And it's not always the best option to just flip to the other side if things aren't going good now, because it may not be the person who's in power who's to blame. And maybe they would be the best people to govern, even though the Democrats have tons of problems, obviously. And I'm very upfront with that. So anyways, long rant. As you can see, to the people who have said, oh, you cover right wingers too much or something, I like to cover the story as it's up and then put within it the important points I want to make, the detailed analysis of the really, really, core important things that we should focus on. So all that said, I think Rick Scott was a little slimy. And I did want to mention at the end of this, the reason why I really don't like Rick Scott is he participated, or he did one of the largest Medicare, Medicaid frauds in history. So we'll just quickly get to that. I know this segment's going way longer than I expected, but I actually had a lot of points that kind of popped up. But this is really important. So if you ever see Rick Scott again, to be aware of this. He defrauded the taxpayer because he sucked money out of Medicare and Medicaid while he was in private industry. So while he was working in business, he did something that was ruled to be, illegal. He had to pay a bunch of money. So Scott's healthcare and Medicare fraud situation is coming back to haunt him. In 1987, Scott started Columbia, which was a hospital company. As the years passed, Scott added hospitals, centers for surgery, and other health locations to the HCA network. In 1997, an investigation was launched after records were seized that were indicative of Medicare and Medicaid fraud. Scott resigned shortly after the investigation started, but he couldn't escape it altogether. Prior to his resignation, several warrants were issued that granted the federal government permission to search hospitals that were owned by Columbia HCA. The warrants also included hospitals previously owned by the company. As part of his resignation, Scott received $300 million in stock, $10 million in cash, and $5 million, which was quite the severance pay. People get paid so much whenever they fail. Okay. He said it was a situation where now this company is getting investigated for Medicare and Medicaid fraud, and he's getting a massive golden parachute. I don't know if it's literally that, but, you know, massive money to leave. According to PolitiFact, the investigation revealed a slew of offenses. It was found that Columbia HCA billed services such as Medicare, Medicaid, and TRICARE for tests the physicians hadn't ordered. Scott's company also trumped diagnoses with fake ones to increase the hospital's reimbursement. Jeez. They illegally claimed that advertising expenses were community education. The company also billed the government on behalf of non-qualifying patients for healthcare visits at home. According to the Department of Justice, Columbia HCA was ordered to pay $840 million in fines. They were ordered to pay $840 million in fines for the fraud that Rick Scott was on the forefront of, in fines and penalties for its deceit. Healthcare providers and professionals hold a public trust, and when the trust is violated by fraud and abuse of program funds and by the payment of kickbacks to the physicians, healthcare for all Americans suffers, stated Robert McCallum, Assistant Attorney General. So massive fraud, which again, whenever you defraud Medicare and Medicaid, that's defrauding the taxpayer, because obviously we fund those programs. So Rick Scott, not someone I like very much, and we got through a lot in covering that story.